Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I used to deliver for a local pizza place in Eugene, Oregon back in 2019. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid my rent, and the hours were flexible enough that I could attend community college during the day. Most nights were pretty routine. Drop off food, get a tip, maybe exchange some small talk, and move on to the next order. But there was one delivery that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. It was a Thursday night in late October, the kind of night where the fog rolls in thick from the coast and everything feels muted and distant. I'd been on shift since 6, and by 11, things had slowed down considerably. I was getting ready to clock out when one last order came through. A large pepperoni pizza and breadsticks. The address was for a house way out on the edge of town, practically in the woods. The kind of place where streetlights don't reach and your GPS signal gets spotty. I remember sighing when I saw the address. It was going to add another 30 minutes to my shift, easy, but money was money, and the tip had been prepaid. $20, which was generous for the area. So I loaded up the warming bag, grabbed my phone, and headed out into the fog. The drive took me down progressively narrower roads. First the main highway, then a 2-lane road, then what was basically a glorified dirt path with some gravel thrown on top. My headlights cut through the fog in weak beams, illuminating pine trees that seemed to press in closer and closer on both sides. I passed maybe 2 other houses in 15 minutes, both with lights on, both looking warm and normal. Then nothing. Just trees and fog and the occasional reflective marker on the side of the road. When my GPS finally told me I'd arrived, I almost drove past it. There was no mailbox, no driveway marker, nothing to indicate a house was even there. Just a narrow gap between the trees that could have been a driveway or could have been a hiking trail. I slowed down and peered into the darkness. There, maybe 50 feet back from the road, I could just barely make out the shape of a house, but there were no lights on. Not a single one. I pulled into what I hoped was the driveway, my tires crunching over wet leaves and fallen branches. The house materialized out of the fog, like something from a dream. It was a small, single-story place with peeling paint and a sagging porch. The windows were dark, completely dark. Not even the blue glow of a TV or the dim light of a lamp left on in a back room. Nothing. I parked and sat there for a moment, engine running, staring at the house. Something felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it exactly, but every instinct I had was telling me to just leave, to call the customer and tell them I couldn't find the address, to drive away and not look back. But I'd been doing deliveries for 2 years at that point. I'd been to plenty of houses where people were just too lazy or too high to turn on their porch lights. This was probably the same thing. I grabbed the pizza and the breadsticks, killed the engine, and got out of my car. The silence hit me immediately. I'm used to quiet nights, but this was different. There were no sounds at all, no wind, no crickets, no distant traffic. Just my footsteps on the gravel and my own breathing, which suddenly seemed way too loud. I walked up to the porch and climbed the 3 steps, which creaked under my weight. The wood felt soft, almost spongy, like it was rotting from the inside. I knocked on the door. 3 solid raps that echoed into the house, and then nothing. No footsteps, no voice calling out that they'd be right there, no dog barking. Just silence. I waited about 30 seconds and then knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I pulled out my phone to call the customer, but I had no signal, not even 1 bar. I should have expected that this far out, but it still made my stomach tighten. I tried the doorbell. I could hear it ringing inside, a muffled electronic chime, but nobody came. I was starting to get annoyed now, which was actually better than the creeping dread I'd been feeling. I'd driven all the way out here, and this person couldn't even be bothered to answer the door. I decided to give it one more try. I knocked again and called out, "Pizza delivery." My voice sounded thin and swallowed up by the fog. That's when I heard it. A sound from inside the house. Not footsteps, exactly. More like something being dragged across the floor. Slow and heavy. It started somewhere deep in the house and gradually got closer to the door. My annoyance evaporated instantly, replaced by something cold in my chest. The dragging sound stopped right on the other side of the door. I could feel someone there, inches away, separated only by a thin piece of wood. But they didn't open the door. They didn't say anything. They just stood there. I have your pizza," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's $23.50 with the tip already included, so yeah, it's here whenever you're ready." Nothing. Just breathing. I couldn't actually hear it, but I could sense it. The presence of another person, right there, listening. I don't know why I didn't just leave the pizza on the porch and get the hell out of there. Maybe it was pride, or stubbornness, or just the sheer weirdness of the situation overriding my common sense. Instead, I reached out and tried the doorknob. It turned easily. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open a few inches. The smell hit me first. Not something horrible like death or decay, but something off. Like old newspapers and stale air and something sweet and chemical that I couldn't identify. The inside of the house was pitch black. I couldn't see anything at all. "Hello?" I called into the darkness. "I'm just going to leave this inside the door, okay?" I heard that dragging sound again, but this time it was moving away, retreating back into the house. I stood there in the doorway, holding a pizza and breadsticks, peering into absolute darkness, every nerve in my body screaming at me to leave. I set the pizza and breadsticks down just inside the door on what felt like a wooden floor. As I did, my hand brushed against something cold and metallic. I jerked my hand back and pulled out my phone, using the screen light to see what I'd touched. It was a chain, a thick, heavy chain, bolted to the floor and extending back into the darkness of the house. I followed it with my eyes as far as the light would reach, but I couldn't see where it ended, or what it was attached to. That's when I heard the breathing. Actual, audible breathing, ragged and wet, coming from somewhere deeper in the house. And then a voice. Quiet, barely a whisper, but unmistakably human. "Help me." I stumbled backward off the porch, nearly falling down the steps. I ran to my car, fumbled with my keys, and got the engine started with shaking hands. As I threw the car into reverse, my headlights swept across the front of the house, and for just a second, I saw something in one of the windows. A face, pale and pressed against the glass, watching me leave. But I couldn't tell if it was the face of the person who'd ordered the pizza, or the face of whoever had whispered for help. I drove back to town way too fast, nearly sliding off the road twice. When I got back to the pizza place, I told my manager what happened. He looked at me like I was crazy, but he called the number from the order anyway. It went straight to a disconnected message. The name on the order was fake. Just a random string of letters. And the credit card that had been used? Stolen. Reported missing 3 days earlier by someone who lived 200 miles away. The police went out to the address the next day. They found the house. They found the chain, but they never told me what else they found, if anything. The case is still open, as far as I know. I quit the delivery job 2 weeks later. I couldn't do it anymore. Every house I went to after that, every dark porch, every unanswered door, I just kept seeing that pale face in the window and hearing that whispered plea for help. I still don't know who ordered that pizza, or why, or what was in that house. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to know. I delivered for a Chinese food place in Tacoma, Washington, for about 3 years. It wasn't my dream job, but it was steady and the tips were usually decent. I got to know the area pretty well. All the apartment complexes, the sketchy neighborhoods, the places where you kept your car doors locked and your eyes forward. You develop a sense for these things when you do delivery work long enough. There was one apartment complex I'd been to dozens of times. It was called Riverside Apartments, though there was no river anywhere near it. It was one of those sprawling complexes from the 70s, all brown siding and external staircases spread out over maybe 4 or 5 buildings. Not the worst place in Tacoma, but not great either. The kind of place where half the exterior lights were always broken and someone's car alarm was always going off. I'd never had any problems there. Until the night I got an order for apartment 2F. It was just past midnight on a Saturday. Late-night orders were common on weekends, usually from people who'd been drinking or smoking and suddenly needed food. This order was pretty standard. Orange chicken, fried rice, egg rolls. The delivery instructions just said 2F and nothing else. No gate code, no special directions, nothing. That should have been my first clue that something was off, because Riverside had a gate that was supposed to stay locked after 10 p.m. When I pulled up to the complex, the gate was open. Not broken open or forced, just standing wide open like someone had left it that way on purpose. The parking lot was mostly empty, which was weird for a Saturday night. Usually there were cars everywhere, people coming and going, but tonight it was quiet. Just a few scattered vehicles and long shadows cast by the few working streetlights. I parked near Building 2 and grabbed the food. The building was in the back corner of the complex, the darkest section where the surrounding trees blocked most of the ambient light from the street. I'd been here before, but never this late, and never when it was this quiet. The staircase to the second floor was external, one of those metal ones that clangs when you walk on it. I climbed up, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The second-floor walkway was narrow, with apartment doors on one side and a railing on the other that overlooked the parking lot. About half the lights were out, creating pockets of deep shadow between the functioning ones. I found 2F about halfway down the walkway. The apartment was dark, just like most of the others, but there was something about it that immediately set me on edge. The door was slightly ajar. Not wide open, just cracked an inch or two, enough to see that the inside was pitch black. I knocked on the door frame. "Delivery," I called out. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet. No response. I waited a few seconds and knocked again, a little harder. "Hello? I've got your food." Still nothing. I pulled out my phone to check the order details, thinking maybe I'd gotten the apartment number wrong. But no. It definitely said 2F. I tried calling the customer. The phone rang once and then went dead. Not to voicemail, just dead. Like the call had been cut off. I was standing there, holding a bag of Chinese food, staring at this partially open door, trying to decide what to do. Protocol said I should try to contact the customer, and if I couldn't reach them, I should wait 5 minutes and then bring the food back to the restaurant. But something about the open door bothered me. Maybe someone inside needed help. Maybe they'd had a medical emergency and couldn't get to the door. I pushed the door open a little more. "Hello? Are you okay in there? I'm just the delivery guy." The smell that came from inside wasn't terrible, but it wasn't right either. It smelled like a place that had been closed up for too long, stale and musty. And there was something else underneath it. Something vaguely sweet and chemical, like cleaning products or air freshener. I used my phone's flashlight to peer inside. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a small, empty living room. No furniture, no pictures on the walls, no curtains on the windows, nothing, just bare walls and bare floors and a doorway leading deeper into the apartment. "Hello?" I called again, taking one step inside. I don't know why I did that. Every instinct should have been telling me to leave, but curiosity, or maybe just stubbornness, pushed me forward. That's when I heard it. A sound from the back of the apartment. A soft scraping, like something being dragged across the floor, then a gentle thump, then silence. Is someone there? I kept my voice calm, but my heart was pounding. Do you need help? The scraping sound came again, closer this time. And then, from the darkness of the back room, I heard breathing, heavy and labored, like someone who'd been running. Or someone who was hurt. I should have left. I know that now. But in the moment, my brain was telling me that someone might be injured, might need help, might have crawled to the phone to order food because they couldn't get to a regular phone to call 911. It sounds stupid now, but it made sense at the time. I took another step into the apartment, sweeping my phone light across the space. The beam landed on the doorway to what I assumed was the bedroom. It was open, and I could see part of the room inside. Same as the living room, completely empty. But there was something on the floor, something dark that my brain couldn't quite process at first. It was a figure, a person maybe, or something shaped like a person, lying on the floor just inside the bedroom doorway. I couldn't see details, just a dark shape that might have been a body. "Oh shit," I breathed. "Are you okay? Can you hear me?" The figure didn't move, but I heard that breathing again, still heavy, still labored. Only now I realized the breathing wasn't coming from the figure on the floor. It was coming from behind me. I spun around. My phone light swept across the living room and landed on the front door. There was someone standing in the doorway. I could see the silhouette, backlit by the parking lot lights outside. Average height, average build, wearing what looked like a hoodie. They weren't moving, just standing there, blocking the exit. Hi, I managed to say, my voice shaking. "I've got your food. It's right here." The figure didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, and I could feel them watching me, even though I couldn't see their face. I realized how stupid I'd been. How monumentally, catastrophically stupid. I'd walked into an empty apartment in the middle of the night because of a food order and an open door, and now I was trapped. The bedroom was behind me, the figure was in front of me, and I had no way out. "I'm just going to leave this here," I said, setting the bag of food on the floor. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. "No charge, it's on me. I'm just going to go." I started moving toward the door, keeping my eyes on the figure. They still hadn't moved, but as I got closer, I could see a little more detail. The hoodie was pulled up, shadowing their face. Their hands were hanging at their sides. Something about their posture was wrong. Too stiff, too still, like they weren't entirely human. When I was about 5 feet away, they moved. Not toward me, but to the side, clearing a path to the door. It should have been a relief, but it wasn't. Because as they moved, I saw their face, or the lack of it. The inside of the hoodie was just dark. Not shadowed, but actually dark, like looking into a deep hole. I didn't wait around to figure out what I was seeing. I bolted for the door, shoving past the figure and onto the walkway. I could hear footsteps behind me, multiple footsteps, way more than just one person, but I didn't look back. I flew down the metal staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time, and sprinted to my car. I was fumbling with my keys when I finally risked a glance back at the building. There were figures on the second-floor walkway, 3, maybe 4 of them, all standing at the railing, all looking down at me. Same hoodies, same impossible stillness. I got in my car, locked the doors, and drove away faster than I've ever driven in my life. I called the police from the restaurant parking lot. They sent a unit out to check the apartment. According to the report, 2F was empty and had been vacant for over a month. No furniture, no food, no people, no record of who'd ordered the delivery. The phone number was a burner that couldn't be traced. The police asked me if I'd been drinking or using drugs. They asked if I was sure about what I'd seen. I told them I was sure, but I could tell they didn't believe me. I kept working deliveries after that, but I never went back to Riverside Apartments. The complex is still there. People still order food from it. But whenever an order comes up for that address, I hand it off to another driver. I don't care if they think I'm crazy. I know what I saw. And I know that whatever was in apartment 2F wasn't human and wasn't looking for Chinese food. I used to drive for one of those food delivery apps. You know the kind, where you're an independent contractor and you just pick up orders and drop them off wherever the app tells you. I did it mostly on weekends to supplement my regular income. It was easy money most of the time. Pick up food from a restaurant, follow the GPS, hand it to a customer, move on to the next one. Simple. But there was one night where an order came through that still doesn't make any sense to me. It was a Friday in late January, around 11 at night. I was working in the outskirts of Boise, Idaho, where the city starts to give way to empty stretches of highway and farmland. It had been a slow night, and I was about to call it quits when a new order popped up. The payout was good, almost $30 for what looked like a short drive, so I accepted it without thinking too much about it. The pickup location was a 24-hour gas station about 10 miles outside of town. That was my first red flag. The app usually had you picking up from restaurants, not gas stations. But some gas stations have decent food counters, hot dogs, burritos, that kind of thing, so I figured maybe that's what it was. The delivery address was even weirder. It wasn't a house or an apartment. It was just a set of coordinates on the side of a highway another 15 miles past the gas station, the middle of nowhere. The customer instructions just said, "Wait by the mile marker, I'll find you." I sat in my car in the restaurant parking lot, where I'd been waiting for orders, staring at my phone. Every logical part of my brain was telling me this was a bad idea, but $30 was $30. And I was already imagining what I could do with it. Gas money, groceries, something other than ramen for dinner. So I started driving. The gas station was exactly where the app said it would be, a brightly lit island in the middle of dark farmland. It was one of those generic places, 2 pumps, a small convenience store, a flickering neon sign that said, "Open 24 hours." There were no other cars there, which wasn't surprising given the time and location. I parked near the entrance and went inside. The clerk was an older guy, maybe in his 60s with gray hair and deep lines in his face. He looked up when I came in, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Not quite fear, but something close to it. Like he'd been dreading my arrival. "I'm here for a pickup," I said, holding up my phone to show him the app. "Order for, I checked the name. "Order for M. Reed." The clerk stared at me for a long moment. Then he said, in a flat, tired voice, "You shouldn't take that order." I blinked. "Excuse me." "That order," he repeated. "You shouldn't take it. Cancel it. Go home." I didn't know what to say. I'd had some weird interactions doing delivery work, but never anything like this. "Look, man, I'm just here to pick up some food. Is it ready or not?" The clerk sighed, a deep, weary sound. He bent down behind the counter and came up with a brown paper bag, the top folded over and stapled shut. He set it on the counter between us. "It's ready, but I'm telling you, don't take it. Nothing good comes from that road." "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to sound casual even though my heart rate was picking up. He shook his head. "You'll see, or maybe you won't. Maybe you'll be smart and turn around." He slid the bag toward me. "No charge. Just take it and do what you want." I grabbed the bag. It was heavier than I expected. There was a weird smell coming from it. Not bad exactly, but not like any food I recognized. Something earthy and sharp. I wanted to ask more questions, but the clerk had already turned away, busying himself with organizing lottery tickets like I wasn't there anymore. I left the gas station and got back in my car. For a minute, I just sat there, holding the bag, trying to decide what to do. The smart move would have been to cancel the order and go home, like the clerk had said. But I was already here. The delivery spot was only 15 miles away, and I really needed that $30. I started driving. The highway was empty, no cars in either direction, no lights except my own headlights cutting through the darkness. On either side of the road, there was nothing but flat, open land, fields that stretched out into the blackness, broken up occasionally by a cluster of trees or a distant farmhouse. The kind of landscape that feels endless and suffocating at the same time. I followed the GPS, watching the little blue dot on my phone inch closer to the delivery point. As I drove, I became aware of how silent it was. I had the radio on, but it was just static. I tried changing the station, but every channel was the same, white noise and occasional bursts of garbled voices that I couldn't make out. Eventually, I just turned it off. The mile marker appeared in my headlights, a small green sign on the side of the road, partially obscured by overgrown weeds. I pulled over onto the shoulder and put my car in park, leaving the engine running. According to the app, I was at the delivery location. Now I just had to wait for the customer. I checked the time. 11:47 p.m. I looked around. There was nothing out here. No houses, no cars, no lights, just the empty highway and the dark fields and the distant silhouette of mountains against the night sky. 1 minute passed. Then 2. I started to feel uneasy. The customer instructions had said they'd find me, but how? There was no one around, no cars approaching from either direction. Nothing. At 11:50, I saw movement in my rear-view mirror. I turned to look and felt my stomach drop. There was someone standing on the road behind my car, just standing there, maybe 20 feet away, illuminated by my tail lights. I hadn't seen them walk up. They were just suddenly there. I rolled down my window and called out, "Are you Emreed?" The figure didn't respond, didn't move. They were wearing dark clothing. I couldn't make out any details, and their face was hidden in shadow. I grabbed the paper bag from the passenger seat and got out of the car, keeping my door open and one foot inside, ready to jump back in if I needed to. "I've got your order," I said, holding up the bag. Do you want me to bring it to you, or—" The figure started walking toward me. Slow, deliberate steps. As they got closer, I could see more details, but they didn't make me feel any better. They were wearing a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat, and their face was still completely shadowed, like the light from my car just couldn't reach it. They stopped about 5 feet away and extended a hand. I noticed the hand was gloved, thick leather gloves that looked old and worn. I handed over the bag, and they took it without a word. "Okay, well, enjoy your meal," I said, trying to sound normal even though every nerve in my body was screaming at me to get back in the car and drive away. The figure held the bag and stood there, and I realized they were looking at me. I couldn't see their eyes, but I could feel their gaze, heavy and cold. "Do you need anything else?" I asked. And then they spoke. The voice was wrong. Too deep, too hollow, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "You should not have come here." Before I could respond, they turned and walked off the road, into the field. I watched as they moved through the tall grass, the paper bag still clutched in their hand, until they disappeared into the darkness. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, trying to process what had just happened. Then I got in my car, locked the doors, and drove away as fast as I could without losing control. I checked the app when I got back to town. The order showed as completed. I'd been paid my $30. But when I looked at the customer details, the name Emreed was gone. The name field was just blank, and the delivery address had changed from those coordinates to just a string of zeros. I contacted app support the next day, trying to report what happened, but they said they had no record of that order. According to their system, I hadn't made any deliveries that night at all. I kept driving for the app for a few more months, but I never accepted another order that didn't have a normal address, and I never drove past that mile marker again. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder what was in that bag, and who or what I really delivered it to. I delivered for a sandwich shop in Flagstaff, Arizona for most of 2021. It was decent work, mostly college students and tourists, usually pretty straightforward. Flagstaff's a small enough city that you get to know the regular spots pretty quickly. There were a few motels on the outskirts of town that I delivered to occasionally, the kind of places where people stayed when they were just passing through on their way to the Grand Canyon or Vegas. One of these motels was called the Desert Rose. It was old, probably built in the 60s, and it looked like it hadn't been updated since. Single-story, L-shaped building with rooms that opened directly to the parking lot. The neon sign out front flickered constantly, and half the letters were burned out so it just read Dierton O.E. Not the kind of place you'd choose to stay unless you were desperate or broke. I'd been there 4 or 5 times before without any issues, but then I got an order for room 12. It was a Wednesday night in March, almost midnight. I was about to finish my shift when the order came through. Turkey club and fries. Delivery to the Desert Rose. Room 12. The name on the order was Sarah Mills. Nothing unusual about it. The tip was average. Everything seemed normal. The drive to the motel took about 10 minutes. When I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed there were only 3 cars there, all of them parked at the far end away from the office. The lot was poorly lit. Just a few overhead lights that cast weak yellow pools on the cracked pavement. Most of the motel was in shadow. I found room 12 easily enough. It was in the middle of the building, its door painted the same faded turquoise as all the others. There was a window next to the door, but the curtains were drawn and I couldn't see any light coming from inside. I knocked on the door. "Delivery," I called out. No response. I waited about 30 seconds and knocked again, louder this time. "Hello? I've got a sandwich for Sarah Mills." Still nothing. I pulled out my phone and called the number from the order. I could hear a phone ringing inside the room, tinny and distant. It rang 6 times and then went to a generic voicemail. I hung up and tried knocking one more time. That's when I noticed the door wasn't fully closed. It was latched, but the frame was warped and there was about a 1/4-inch gap where the door didn't quite meet the jamb. I could see a sliver of darkness inside. "Hello?" I called through the gap. "Your food's here. I'm just going to leave it by the door if you don't answer." I heard something from inside. A soft sound, almost like a whimper or a moan. My first thought was that maybe the customer was sick or hurt or had passed out. People traveling alone sometimes have medical emergencies with no one around to help them. I pressed my face closer to the gap and tried to peer inside, but it was too dark to see anything. "Are you okay in there?" I called. "Do you need me to call someone?" The sound came again, a little louder this time. Definitely a human voice, but muffled, like someone was trying to speak through cloth or was too weak to speak clearly. I tried the door. It wasn't locked. It swung open easily, revealing a dark motel room. The smell hit me immediately. Not something rotten or dangerous, just the stale smell of old carpet and cleaning chemicals and air conditioning that had been running for too long. I fumbled for a light switch on the wall inside the door and found one. A lamp on the bedside table clicked on, casting weak yellow light across the room. The room was small and sparse. One bed with a faded floral bedspread, a small TV on a dresser, a bathroom door standing open showing a glimpse of old tile. Everything looked normal except for one thing. There was someone on the bed. A woman was lying on top of the covers, fully clothed, on her side facing away from me. She had long dark hair and was wearing jeans and a jacket. She wasn't moving. "Miss, are you all right?" I took a step into the room, still holding the bag of food. "I've got your sandwich. Are you sick?" She didn't respond, didn't move. I walked closer, my heart starting to pound. When I got round the side of the bed where I could see her face, I stopped. Her eyes were open, wide open, staring at nothing. Her mouth was slightly parted, and she wasn't breathing. I dropped the bag of food. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing. Was she dead? Had she overdosed? Had something happened to her? I should call 911. I should get out of the room. Her eyes moved, just a tiny flicker, shifting to look at me. And then her mouth opened wider, and that muffled sound came out again, louder now. It wasn't a moan. It was words. She was trying to say something, but her lips weren't moving properly, like she was partially paralyzed. "Jew, out." I stumbled backward, knocking into the dresser. The woman on the bed still wasn't moving anything except her eyes, which were now locked onto me with an expression of desperate terror. "Get out. That's when I heard it, the sound of a door opening. Not the door I'd come through, the bathroom door. I'd seen it standing open when I came in, showing an empty bathroom. But now, someone was coming out of it. I didn't wait to see who it was. I ran for the exit, nearly tripping over the bag of food I'd dropped. Behind me, I heard heavy footsteps and a man's voice, angry and shouting, but I couldn't make out the words. I burst out of the room and into the parking lot, sprinting for my car. I got in, started the engine, and looked back at room 12. The door was still open, light spilling out onto the pavement. A figure appeared in the doorway, a large man in a flannel shirt and jeans. He stood there for a moment, looking at my car. Then he calmly reached out and closed the door. I called 911 as I drove away, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I told them what I'd seen, gave them the address of the motel, told them I thought someone was in danger. They said they'd send a unit to check it out. I found out later what had happened. The woman's name wasn't Sarah Mills. That was a fake name. Her real name was Rachel Cordova, and she'd been reported missing 3 days earlier from her home in Phoenix. The man in the room was her ex-boyfriend. He'd been keeping her there, drugged and unable to move or call for help. He'd ordered the food using her phone, probably to keep her fed and alive. When the police arrived, he was gone. Rachel was still on the bed, unable to move. She'd been given some kind of paralytic drug, something that kept her conscious but immobile. They found him 2 days later trying to cross into Mexico. He's in prison now, waiting for trial. Rachel survived, but I heard she has permanent nerve damage from whatever he gave her. I think about that night a lot, about how I almost didn't go into that room, about how I almost just left the food by the door and drove away, following protocol. If I had, she might have died, or he might have moved her somewhere else, somewhere the police would never find her. But I also think about the look in her eyes, the complete terror. The way she was screaming at me to get out with eyes that moved but a body that couldn't. Sometimes I dream about it, about walking into that room and seeing her on the bed, frozen but aware, trapped. I quit the delivery job a month later. I told myself it was because I'd found better work, but really, I just couldn't do it anymore. Every door I knocked on, every dark motel room, every unanswered phone call, it all reminded me of room 12. And I couldn't shake the feeling that one day I'd knock on another door and find something even worse on the other side. I spent 2 years delivering for a meal kit service in rural Montana. If you're not familiar with how those work, it's basically this. People order fresh meal ingredients online, and they get delivered to their door in insulated boxes. My job was to drive a refrigerated van along a route, dropping off boxes at houses all over the countryside. Most of my customers were families who lived too far from town to conveniently shop for groceries, or older folks who couldn't drive anymore. The route was long. Sometimes I'd cover over 200 miles in a single day, but it was peaceful. I'd listen to podcasts, enjoy the scenery, and not have to deal with the stress of a normal service job. The route changed slightly from week to week depending on who had ordered, but there were certain landmarks I'd always pass. Old barns, specific trees, a church with a broken steeple, that kind of thing. After a few months, I knew the roads like the back of my hand. That's why it was so strange when I found the house. It was a Thursday in late September. I was near the end of my route, about 90 miles from the nearest town. The sun was getting low, casting long shadows across the golden grass that covered the rolling hills. I had 2 deliveries left, and according to my GPS, they were both on Old Mill Road, a dirt track that wound through some of the most isolated country in the area. The first delivery went fine. A family with 3 kids and a couple of dogs. Normal, friendly. I dropped off their box and continued on. The second delivery was for an address I'd never seen before, 474V2 Old Mill Road. The name on the order was E. Holloway. I didn't recognize it, but that wasn't unusual. People signed up and canceled the service all the time. What was unusual was that I couldn't find the house. Old Mill Road is only about 8 miles long. I'd been up and down it dozens of times. There are maybe 6 houses total on the entire road, all of them clearly visible from the main track, but 4772 didn't match any of them. And according to my GPS, it should have been right in the middle of the road, between 2 houses I'd delivered to many times before. I drove slowly, checking my GPS every few seconds. The blue dot showing my location crept along the road while the marker for the delivery address stayed stubbornly in one spot. When I reached the point where the GPS said I should be at 4772, I stopped. There was nothing there, no house, no driveway, no mailbox. Just an overgrown field on one side of the road and a stand of pine trees on the other. I got out of the van and looked around. Maybe there was a driveway I'd missed, hidden by trees or overgrowth. I walked along the road for about 50 yards in each direction, but I didn't see anything. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "Are you here with my delivery?" I typed back, "I'm at the address on Old Mill Road, but I don't see a house. Can you give me more specific directions?" The response came almost immediately. "You're at the right place. Look for the gap in the trees." I looked at the stand of pine trees across the road from where I'd parked. Now that I was really looking, I could see what might have been a gap, a narrow opening between the trees where the shadows seemed a little deeper than they should be. I crossed the road and approached the trees. Sure enough, there was a gap, barely wide enough for a car, and beyond it, I could see tire tracks in the dirt, faint but visible. A driveway, or something like it. I went back to the van and carefully maneuvered it into the gap. The branches scraped against the sides of the vehicle as I drove forward, following the faint tracks. After about 100 feet, the trees opened up into a small clearing, and there was a house. It was small and old, the kind of place that looked like it had been built by hand 100 years ago. Rough-cut logs, a stone chimney, a porch with weathered boards. There were no power lines leading to it, no satellite dish, nothing to indicate modern utilities. Just the house, sitting alone in the clearing, surrounded by trees. I parked and grabbed the delivery box from the back of the van. As I approached the house, I noticed how quiet it was. No birds, no wind, no distant sounds of traffic or farm equipment. Just silence and the soft crunch of my footsteps on the dirt. The porch steps creaked under my weight. I knocked on the door and it swung open immediately, like someone had been standing right on the other side waiting for me. But no one was there. The door was open, revealing a dim interior. I could see a wooden floor, a simple table and chairs, a stone fireplace. Everything looked old and handmade, like something from a historical museum. "Hello," I called out. "I've got your delivery." No response. I stood there awkwardly, holding the box. My phone buzzed again. Another text. "Just leave it inside. Thank you." I didn't want to go into the house. Every instinct I had was telling me this wasn't right, that I should just leave the box on the porch and get out of there. But I'd been explicitly told to leave it inside, and I didn't want to get a complaint for not following instructions. I stepped through the doorway. The inside of the house was cold, much colder than it should have been given the warm September weather outside. I could see my breath misting in the air. The walls were bare logs, chinked with what looked like clay and moss. There were no light fixtures, no electrical outlets, no signs of modern anything. I set the box on the table and turned to leave. That's when I noticed the photographs. They were on the mantel above the fireplace, maybe a dozen of them in old-fashioned frames. I took a step closer, curious despite myself. The photos were black and white, or maybe sepia-toned, and they showed people in old-fashioned clothing, people from maybe the 1920s or 30s, based on the style. But something about them was wrong. The people in the photos weren't posed normally. They were all standing rigid and straight, their faces blank, their eyes staring directly at the camera with no emotion at all. And in every photo, there was the same house in the background. This house. I heard a floorboard creak behind me. I spun around. There was a woman standing in the doorway to what I assumed was a bedroom. She was wearing a long dress, the kind you'd see in an old Western movie, and her hair was pulled back severely from her face. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her eyes were wide and fixed on me. "Thank you for the delivery," she said. Her voice was flat and strange, like she was reading from a script. "No problem," I managed to say. "I'm just going to—" "Stay a moment," she interrupted. "It's so rare that I have visitors. I really should be going. I have to get back before dark." She tilted her head, studying me. Before dark. Yes, that would be wise. There was something about the way she said it that made my skin crawl. I started moving toward the door, keeping my eyes on her. She didn't move, just watched me with a blank, unsettling stare. I made it to the door and stepped out onto the porch. The woman was still standing in the same spot, framed by the dim interior of the house. "Will you come back?" she asked. "If there's another delivery," I said, trying to sound polite and professional. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "There will be." I got in my van and drove back down the narrow driveway, branches scraping the sides again. When I reached Old Mill Road and looked back, I couldn't see the gap in the trees anymore. It was like it had closed up behind me. I checked my delivery list when I got back to town. The address for 47572 Old Mill Road was still there, but the name had changed. It no longer said E. Holloway. It was just blank. I looked up the address later that night. According to county records, there was no 47572 Old Mill Road. The road only went up to about 3800, and there was no record of any property or residence beyond that. A week later, another order came through for the same address. Same blank name field. Same location on my GPS that was supposedly in the middle of nowhere on Old Mill Road. I didn't take it. I told my supervisor the address didn't exist and I wasn't going to waste time trying to find it again. He checked the system and said there was no such order. According to the records, I'd never made a delivery to 4772 Old Mill Road. It wasn't in the system at all, but I know it was real. I have the texts on my phone, or at least I did. When I went to show them to my supervisor, they were gone. The entire conversation had vanished from my message history. I quit the job a month later. I told people it was because I'd found better work in town, but really, I just couldn't drive that route anymore. Every time I passed those stands of trees along Old Mill Road, I'd look for the gap, and sometimes, just for a second, I'd see it. A narrow opening in the shadows. leading to something that shouldn't exist. I never went back. And I don't plan to. I delivered for a sushi restaurant in downtown Seattle for about 6 months in 20 towns at sea. It was during the pandemic, so business was actually pretty good. Lots of people stuck at home, ordering food instead of going out. Seattle's got a ton of high-rise apartment buildings, especially downtown, so I got pretty used to navigating them. Finding the right lobby, getting buzzed in, figuring out which elevator went where. Most buildings were pretty straightforward, but there was one that always gave me trouble. It was called the Westlake Tower, a 30-story building on the edge of downtown with views of the water. It was one of those modern glass and steel structures, all sharp angles and reflective surfaces. The problem with Westlake Tower was that it had a weird layout. The elevators didn't go to all the floors from the main lobby. If you wanted to get to floors 20 through 30, you had to take one elevator to the 19th floor, then transfer to a different bank of elevators in a separate lobby. It was confusing, and I'd gotten lost in there more than once. I'd delivered to Westlake maybe a dozen times, always to different apartments on the lower floors. But then I got an order for apartment 2907, 29th floor, one of the high ones. It was a Friday night, around 10 p.m. The order was pretty standard, 2 specialty rolls and some edamame. The customer's name was listed as J. Byrne. No special instructions, just the apartment number. I pulled up to Westlake Tower and parked in the loading zone out front. The building's lobby was bright and modern, all white marble and chrome and huge windows looking out on the street. There was a security desk, but no one was sitting at it. That wasn't too unusual during the pandemic. A lot of buildings had reduced their staff. I went to the elevator and hit the button for 19, then waited while it climbed. The elevator was glass-walled, and I could see out into the atrium of the building as I ascended. Everything looked normal. Quiet and empty, but normal. The doors opened on 19, and I stepped out into the transfer lobby. This was the weird part of the building. A small windowless space with just a couple of chairs and a second set of elevators. It always felt cramped and claustrophobic compared to the spacious main lobby. I pressed the call button for the upper floor elevators and waited. The indicator above the door showed the elevator descending, 30, 29, 28. It stopped on 28. The doors didn't open. The indicator just sat there, glowing softly, showing the number 28. After about 30 seconds, I pressed the call button again. The indicator flickered but didn't move. Still 28. I sighed and pulled out my phone to call the customer, thinking maybe I could meet them in the main lobby instead. But I had no signal. That was weird. I'd had full bars just a minute ago in the main lobby, but up here, nothing. The elevator indicator suddenly jumped to 29, then 30, then started descending again. When it reached 19, the doors opened. The elevator was empty. I stepped inside and pressed the button for 29. The doors closed and the elevator started to rise. As we passed each floor, I watched the numbers light up above the door. 20, 21, 22. Between 24 and 25, the elevator slowed down. Not stopped, but definitely slowed, like it was struggling. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. We reached 29 and the doors opened. I stepped out into a hallway that looked wrong. It was the same style as the rest of the building, same carpet and paint and lighting, but something about it felt off. Too quiet, too still, like I was looking at a photograph of a hallway instead of an actual hallway. Apartment 2907 should have been to the right, based on the numbering system I'd figured out from previous deliveries. I started walking, checking the numbers on the doors as I passed. 2001, 2003, 2005. 2007 was at the end of the hall. The door looked the same as all the others, modern, painted dark gray, with a brushed steel number plate and a peephole. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again and called out, "Sushi delivery." Nothing. I tried calling the customer, but I still had no signal. I was starting to get frustrated. I'd come all the way up to the 29th floor, navigated the weird elevator system, and now the customer wasn't answering. I was about to just leave the food by the door and go when I noticed something. The door to 2907 wasn't quite closed. It was open about an inch, like someone had just pushed it without making sure it latched. "Hello?" I called through the gap. "I've got your sushi order." No response. But I could hear something from inside the apartment. A soft sound, almost like music or voices, but muffled and indistinct. Against my better judgment, I pushed the door open a little wider and peered inside. The apartment was dark except for a faint blue glow coming from somewhere deeper in. TV light, probably. "Hello, are you there? Your food's here." Still no answer, but the muffled sound continued. I could almost make out words now, but they were too distorted to understand. I stepped into the apartment. Just inside the door was a small entryway, and beyond that, I could see a living room. The blue glow was coming from a TV mounted on the wall, but the screen was just showing static. The apartment was furnished. I could see a couch, a coffee table, some modern art on the walls, but something about it felt staged, like a showroom in a furniture store rather than a place where someone actually lived. "Anybody home?" My voice sounded too loud in the silence. I walked further into the apartment, toward the source of the muffled sound. As I got closer, I realized it was coming from a closed door on the far side of the living room, a bedroom, probably. I should have left, I know that. But there was something compelling about that sound, something that made me want to know what it was, like it was pulling me forward. I reached the bedroom door and put my hand on the knob. The muffled sound was clearer now. It was definitely voices. Multiple voices, talking over each other, but I still couldn't make out what they were saying. I opened the door. The bedroom was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no decorations, nothing. Just bare walls and bare floor and a single window looking out onto the Seattle skyline. But the voices were louder now, coming from all around me, echoing off the empty walls, and I could finally make out what they were saying. They were saying my name. Over and over, dozens of voices all whispering or calling or screaming my name layered on top of each other until it became a wall of sound that pressed in on me from all sides. I stumbled backward out of the bedroom, my heart racing. The living room looked different now. The furniture was still there, but it was wrong, distorted, like I was seeing it through water or heat waves. The TV was still showing static, but now I could see shapes moving in the static. Human shapes. Reaching out. I ran for the door. As I reached it, I heard footsteps behind me. Fast, heavy footsteps, multiple sets, like several people were chasing me. But when I glanced back, there was no one there. Just the distorted living room and the static-filled TV and the open bedroom door showing that empty, impossible room. I made it out into the hallway and sprinted for the elevators. I slammed my hand on the call button, and miraculously, the doors opened immediately. I threw myself inside and pressed the button for the lobby, anywhere but the 29th floor. The elevator descended normally. The numbers ticked down, each one lighting up in sequence. 28, 27, 26. When the doors opened on the ground floor lobby, everything looked normal. Bright lights, white marble, the empty security desk. I walked out on shaking legs and left through the front entrance. I sat in my car for a long time, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what had happened. Eventually, I looked at my phone. I had full signal again. There was a notification from the delivery app. Order for J. Barn. Apartment 297. Cancelled. The order had been cancelled, but I hadn't cancelled it. and according to the timestamp, it had been cancelled before I'd even entered the building. I called the restaurant and asked them about the order. They checked their system and said there was no order for Westlake Tower that night. No J. Byrne, no apartment, 2907. I looked up the Westlake Tower directory later. There is no apartment, 2907. The 29th floor only has apartments 2901 through 2906. According to the building layout, 2907 doesn't exist. The space where it should be is part of the building's mechanical systems. HVAC and electrical, not residential. I never went back to that building. When orders came up for Westlake Tower, I'd decline them or pass them to another driver. Nobody ever asked why, and I never told anyone what happened. But sometimes, late at night, I'll be scrolling through my phone and I'll see something that makes my blood run cold. A notification from the delivery app, just for a second before it disappears. An order for apartment 2907. An order that doesn't exist, for a place that shouldn't be there. And every time I see it, I hear those voices again, whispering my name from somewhere far away. I worked for a pizza delivery chain in Portland, Oregon for 3 years. By the end of my time there, I'd pretty much seen it all. Weird customers, strange requests, sketchy neighborhoods, bizarre delivery instructions. You get used to it after a while. It all becomes routine. But there was one delivery, right at the end of my last shift, that I still can't explain. It was a Sunday night in November. I'd already given my 2 weeks' notice, and this was my final night on the job. I was planning to finish up around midnight and then never think about delivering pizza again. The shift had been slow, just a handful of orders spread out over 6 hours. I was actually looking forward to it being over. At 11:47 p.m., right as I was getting ready to clock out, one last order came through. Large pepperoni pizza. Delivery to an address in northwest Portland, up in the hills. The name on the order was Marcus Chen. Nothing unusual about it. The tip was prepaid, $15, which was generous. My manager looked at me apologetically. I know you wanted to get out of here, but you're the only driver on shift. Can you take this last one? I sighed, but nodded. One more delivery. Then I'd be done forever. I could handle that. The address was in a nice neighborhood, expensive houses with big yards and views of the city. It took me about 20 minutes to get there, winding up narrow roads that climbed into the hills. The house was at the end of a cul-de-sac, a modern 2-story place with lots of glass and angular architecture. All the lights were on, which was a good sign. At least I wouldn't have to wander around in the dark trying to find the place. I parked in the driveway and grabbed the pizza. As I walked up to the front door, I noticed something odd. There was music playing inside the house, loud enough that I could hear it through the door. Not party music or TV music, but something classical. An orchestra, maybe. It sounded old and scratchy, like it was being played on a record player. I rang the doorbell and waited. The music continued, but no one came to the door. I rang again and knocked for good measure. Still nothing. I was reaching for my phone to call the customer when the door opened. The man standing in the doorway was probably in his 60s, wearing slacks and a cardigan like he'd just come from teaching at a university. He had grey hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a pleasant, slightly distracted expression. "Ah, the pizza," he said, smiling. "Perfect timing. Come in, come in." I've got your order here," I said, holding up the pizza box. "That'll be $22.50, but I see the tip was already—" Yes, come inside," he interrupted, already turning and walking back into the house. "I need to grab my wallet. It's just in the other room." I hesitated. Normally, I didn't go into customers' houses, but it wasn't technically against the rules, and the guy seemed harmless. Plus, I just wanted to finish this delivery and get out of there. I stepped inside. The house was beautiful. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, expensive-looking furniture. The classical music was louder in here, coming from a room off to the left. The man led me through the entryway and into a large living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. "Beautiful view, isn't it?" he said, gesturing toward the windows. "That's why I bought this place. The view." "It's nice," I agreed, still holding the pizza and wondering when he was going to get his wallet. "Would you like something to drink?" he asked. "I have beer, wine, soda." "No, thanks. I'm working. I really should get going once you pay for the pizza." He looked at me with that pleasant, distracted expression. "Pay for the pizza? Oh, of course. Yes. Let me just..." He trailed off and walked toward a doorway on the far side of the room. I waited. The classical music continued, that old scratchy sound filling the house. Now that I was listening more carefully, I realized it was the same phrase repeating over and over. About 10 seconds of music, then it would skip back and play the same section again. The man didn't come back. "Sir?" I called out. "I really need to get going." No response. I walked toward the doorway he'd gone through and peered into the next room. It was a study or office, with bookshelves and a desk and a leather chair. Empty. "Hello?" I stepped into the study and looked around. There was another doorway on the opposite side leading to what looked like a hallway. "Sir, are you there?" I followed the hallway, which led past a bathroom and a spare bedroom, both empty. At the end of the hall was a closed door. I knocked on it. "Sir, I've got your pizza. Do you still want it?" The door swung open at my touch. It wasn't latched. Beyond the door was a staircase leading down. Basement stairs. A light was on down there, casting a yellow glow up the stairs. "Hello," I called down. "Sir?" I heard movement from the basement. Footsteps, and then the man's voice. "Down here, just getting my wallet." Something about his voice sounded wrong. Flat, like he was reading lines. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, to just put the pizza down and walk out of this house and never look back. But I'd already come this far, and I just wanted to finish this last delivery and be done. I started down the stairs. The basement was finished with carpet and drywall and recessed lighting. At the bottom of the stairs was a large open space, set up like a rec room. There was a pool table, a bar, some comfortable-looking couches, and standing in the middle of the room was the man, still wearing that pleasant expression, still looking slightly distracted. "Here we are," he said, gesturing around the room. "This is where I spend most of my time." I held up the pizza box. "Your order, sir, $22.50. He tilted his head, studying me. "Tell me something. Do you believe in fate?" What? "Fate, destiny. The idea that certain things are meant to happen, that we're all following a predetermined path." I was getting seriously uncomfortable now. "I don't know, man. I just deliver pizzas. Can you please pay so I can go?" "You were supposed to be here," he said. "Tonight. This exact time. This was always going to happen." "Okay, you're creeping me out now. I'm going to leave the pizza here and go." I set the box on the pool table and turned toward the stairs. "You can't leave," he said calmly. "Not yet. We haven't finished." I started up the stairs, moving fast. Behind me, I heard his footsteps, slow and measured, following me up. I reached the top of the stairs and rushed back through the hallway, through the study, into the living room. The front door was right there, maybe 20 feet away. But standing between me and the door was the man, the same man who'd been following me up from the basement. He was smiling that same pleasant smile. I spun around. The man was still on the stairs behind me. I could see him through the doorway, climbing slowly. There were two of him. What the fuck? I stumbled backward, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. The man by the front door took a step toward me. "You were supposed to be here," he said, in perfect sync with the man on the stairs, both of them speaking the same words at the same time. I ran. Not toward the front door. That was blocked. Instead, I ran toward the kitchen, which I'd seen off to the side when I first came in. There had to be a back door or a window I could break, some way out of this insane house. The kitchen was large and modern, all stainless steel and granite countertops. I saw a door on the far side and sprinted for it, praying it led outside. I burst through the door and found myself in a garage. 2 cars, both expensive-looking, both covered in a layer of dust like they hadn't been driven in months. And at the far end of the garage, a door with a window showing the driveway outside. I ran for it, grabbed the handle, and pulled. It was locked. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my hands shaking, and finally got it open. I exploded out into the driveway and ran for my car. I could hear the door opening behind me, could hear those measured footsteps. I got in my car, started the engine, and reversed out of the driveway so fast my tires screamed. As I peeled out of the cul-de-sac, I looked in my rear-view mirror. The man, or men, or whatever they were, was standing in the driveway watching me go. Even from this distance, I could see he was smiling. I drove back to the pizza place, my entire body shaking. My manager took one look at me and asked what had happened. I tried to explain, but it sounded insane even to my own ears. 2 of the same person. A basement that felt wrong, the classical music that kept skipping. He called the customer's number. It went to a disconnected message. He checked the order details. The address was real, but the name was fake. Marcus Chen wasn't in any of our customer databases. The credit card used for the order was reported stolen 2 weeks earlier. The police went to the house the next day. It was empty, furnished, but empty. No signs that anyone had been living there recently. No record player, no classical music, no dust-covered cars in the garage. The owner of the house was a real estate investor who lived in California. The place had been sitting vacant for 3 months, waiting to be sold. There was no way someone could have ordered pizza from an empty house. No way I could have been let inside by someone who wasn't there. But I was. I know I was. I have the memory of it, clear as anything. The view from those windows, the smell of expensive furniture and old books, that skipping classical music, and the man with the pleasant smile telling me I was supposed to be there. I never delivered another pizza. That was my last shift, and I made sure it stayed that way. Sometimes I drive past that cul-de-sac, that house on the hill with the big windows and the view of the city. The lights are always off now. No one ever bought it. It just sits there, empty and waiting. Waiting for what? I don't want to know. I delivered for a sandwich shop in Spokane, Washington, throughout 2018 and 2019. Spokane gets pretty intense weather in the winter. Snow, ice, sub-zero temperatures. Most people stayed home when the weather got bad, which meant delivery business usually picked up. People still wanted food. They just didn't want to go out in the cold to get it. There was one night in January 2019 when we had a massive winter storm. The news had been warning about it for days, forecasting over 1 foot of snow, ice, dangerous wind chills. Most businesses closed early, but my manager decided to keep the shop open until at least 9 p.m., figuring we'd get a rush of orders from people stocking up before the worst of the storm hit. He was right. Between 5 and 8 p.m., we got slammed. Every driver was out constantly, running orders all over the city. By 8:30, things had finally slowed down. The snow was coming down hard now, and the roads were getting treacherous. My manager called all the drivers back and said we were closing up early. I made it back to the shop around 8:45, covered in snow and ready to go home. The other 2 drivers had already left. It was just me and my manager starting to close things down when one last order came through. "You've got to be kidding me," my manager muttered, looking at the order screen. "Who orders food in this weather?" The order was for 2 sandwiches and chips, delivery to an address on the north side of town. The area was mostly residential, lower-income neighborhoods with small houses and apartment complexes. The name on the order was Patricia Simmons. "I'll take it," I said, more out of obligation than anything else. I was already there, already bundled up. One more delivery wouldn't kill me. My manager looked relieved. "Thanks, man. Be careful out there. Roads are getting bad." He wasn't wrong. The drive across town took twice as long as it normally would. The main roads were barely passable, covered in several inches of snow that hadn't been plowed yet. Side streets were even worse. My car slipped and slid, and I had to crawl along at maybe 15 miles per hour. The address led me to a small house on a quiet street. Most of the houses on the block were dark, either because people had lost power or because they'd gone to bed early. But this house had lights on in the windows, warm yellow light that looked welcoming in the storm. I parked as close as I could and grabbed the order. The snow was really coming down now. Thick flakes that instantly covered my coat and hat. The wind had picked up, too, howling down the empty street and cutting through my layers of clothing. I hurried up the walkway to the front porch and knocked on the door. A woman answered almost immediately, like she'd been waiting right by the door. She was maybe in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair and a kind face. She was wearing a bathrobe and slippers. "Oh, thank you so much for coming out in this weather," she said, taking the bag of food. "I really appreciate it. Let me get you a tip. I know the online one probably wasn't enough." "It's no problem," I said, though I was already thinking about the drive back and hoping I wouldn't slide off the road. She disappeared into the house for a moment and came back with a $20 bill. "Here, stay safe out there." I thanked her and turned to leave. As I did, she called out, "Do you need to use the bathroom or anything before you go? It's a long drive back in this storm." I was about to decline, but honestly, I did need to use the bathroom. I'd been out on deliveries for hours, and the cold wasn't helping. "Actually, yeah, that would be great. Thanks." She stepped aside to let me in. The house was warm and cozy, a stark contrast to the storm outside. There was a small living room with a couch and a TV playing the news, and a narrow hallway leading to what I assumed were the bedrooms and bathroom. "Bathrooms down the hall, first door on the right," she said. I walked down the hallway, my snow-covered boots leaving wet prints on the carpet. The bathroom was small and dated but clean. I did my business, washed my hands, and was about to leave when I noticed something odd. There were no personal items in the bathroom, no toothbrush, no soap, no shampoo, no towels. Just an empty counter and an empty shower. Like the bathroom had been staged but not actually used. I felt a prickle of unease. I opened the door and stepped back into the hallway. "Hey, thanks again," I started to say, but stopped. The woman was standing at the end of the hallway, just outside the living room. She was still smiling, but something about her expression had changed. It looked forced now, like she was wearing a mask. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Yeah, I should probably get going. The roads are getting worse." Of course. She didn't move. I walked toward her, trying to seem casual even though my heart was starting to pound. As I passed the living room, I glanced inside. The TV was still on, still showing the news. But I noticed something I hadn't before. There was no furniture except for the couch. No pictures on the walls, no books or decorations, no signs that anyone actually lived here. And on the couch I could see shapes under a blanket. 3 or 4 lumps, like people were sleeping there. "Is someone else here?" I asked, stopping. The woman's smile widened. "Just my family. They're sleeping." One of the shapes under the blanket moved. Not like someone rolling over in their sleep, but like something was struggling. And I heard a muffled sound, like someone trying to scream through a gag. I backed toward the door. "I need to go, right now." The woman's expression didn't change. "You should stay. The storm's getting worse." "You might not make it home." I turned and grabbed the doorknob. It didn't turn. I tried again, pulling and twisting, but the door was locked from the inside and I couldn't figure out the mechanism in my panic. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Multiple sets of footsteps. I spun around and saw 3 men emerging from the hallway, the same hallway I'd just been in. They were all wearing dark clothing and blank expressions, and they were moving toward me slowly, deliberately. I yanked on the door again, and this time the lock gave way. I burst out into the storm, stumbling off the porch and into the snow. I could hear the door opening behind me, could hear those footsteps following. I made it to my car, fumbled with my keys, and got the door open. As I started the engine, I looked back at the house. The woman was standing on the porch, still smiling. The 3 men were standing behind her, and I could see more shapes in the windows, dark silhouettes watching me leave. I drove away, skidding and sliding through the snow. I made it about 2 blocks before I had to pull over because my hands were shaking too badly to drive. I sat there in my car, engine running, heater blasting, trying to calm down enough to think clearly. I called 911. I told them about the house, the woman, the shapes under the blanket, the men in dark clothing. The dispatcher said they'd send someone to check it out, but it might take a while because of the storm. I drove to a gas station and waited there until the police called me back. They'd been to the house. It was empty. No furniture, no people, no woman named Patricia Simmons. The owner of the house was a property management company. The place had been vacant for 2 months, but the order was real. I had the receipt, the address, the $20 tip in my pocket. Someone had placed that order. Someone had answered the door. The police filed a report, but told me there wasn't much they could do. No crime had been committed, technically. I hadn't been hurt or robbed. I'd just been scared. I quit the delivery job the next week. I told my manager I'd found better work, but really, I just couldn't do it anymore. Every house I delivered to, every door that opened, I kept seeing that woman's forced smile and those shapes under the blanket and those silhouettes in the windows. I still live in Spokane. I still drive past that street sometimes. The house is still there, still vacant according to public records. But sometimes, late at night, I'll see lights in the windows. Warm, yellow light, welcoming in the dark. And I wonder who else has knocked on that door, who else has been invited inside, and who else didn't make it back out. I delivered for a Thai restaurant in Boston for most of 2020. During the pandemic, a lot of office buildings were either empty or only partially occupied, with most people working from home. But there were still some businesses that stayed open, still some people who came into the office every day. One of our regular customers was someone who worked in a building downtown near Government Center. The building was one of those old stone structures from the early 1900s, 10 stories tall with narrow windows and a facade that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in decades. I delivered there maybe 6 or 7 times, always late at night, always to the same person, someone named Alex Porter, who apparently worked on the 7th floor. The orders were always the same, pad thai and spring rolls, delivered between 10 and 11 p.m. I'd go in through the main entrance, which was always unlocked, take the old elevator up to 7, and leave the food outside office 7:14. There was never anyone around. The building was always dead silent, and I'd never actually seen Alex Porter. They always left a note asking me to leave the food by the door and texted to confirm when I dropped it off. Easy money. Until the night I actually met them. It was a Wednesday in October. I'd picked up the usual order and driven to the building, arriving around 10:30 p.m. The main entrance was unlocked, as always. The lobby was dimly lit, just a few old fluorescent fixtures that buzzed and flickered. There was a security desk, but it was unstaffed. The building felt abandoned, but in a way I'd gotten used to. I crossed the empty lobby to the elevator and pressed the call button. The elevator was old, One of those Art Deco things with a brass gate you had to pull closed manually. It clanked and groaned as it descended from wherever it had been sitting. When the doors opened, there was someone inside. It was a woman, maybe in her 30s, wearing business casual clothes, slacks and a blouse. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and was staring down at her phone. She didn't look up when I got in. 7, please, I said, since she was closer to the buttons. She pressed 7 without looking at me or saying anything. The elevator lurched upward, that old mechanical grinding sound filling the small space. I tried to make polite small talk. Working late? She didn't respond. Didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken. Just kept staring at her phone. I gave up and stood there in awkward silence as the elevator climbed. The numbers above the door lit up in sequence. 2, 3, 4. Between 4 and 5, the elevator shuddered and slowed. Not stopped, just slowed way down like it was struggling. The lights flickered. This happened a lot, I asked the woman, trying to sound casual even though I was getting nervous. She still didn't respond, but she looked up from her phone, and that's when I saw her face. Her eyes were wrong, not the color or the shape, but the way they looked, empty, like she was staring through me at something far away. The elevator shuddered again and resumed its normal speed. 5, 6, 7. The doors opened on the 7th floor, and the woman walked out without a word, disappearing down the dark hallway. I stood there for a second, trying to shake off the weird feeling I'd gotten from her, then stepped out into the hallway myself. The 7th floor was always dim, lit only by emergency exit signs and whatever light filtered in from the windows. Office 714 was at the end of the main hallway. I'd been there enough times that I could navigate it even in the low light. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing on the old wooden floor. Most of the office doors were closed, frosted glass windows showing nothing but darkness inside. A few were open, revealing empty rooms with desks and chairs covered in dust. I reached 714 and knocked just to be polite, even though I was just going to leave the food and go. "Delivery," I called out. The door opened. Standing in the doorway was the woman from the elevator. Same clothes, same ponytail, same empty stare. Hi, I said, confused. Were you just in the elevator with me?" She didn't answer. Just reached out and took the bag of food from my hands. "Are you Alex Porter?" I asked. She tilted her head slightly, like she was considering the question. Then she said, in a flat, emotionless voice, "Yes." Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl, like she was reading from a script, or like she wasn't entirely sure what the words meant. "Okay, well, enjoy your meal," I said, taking a step back. She kept staring at me with those empty eyes. "Do you want to come inside?" "No, I'm good. I need to get going." "Are you sure? I could use the company." There was something wrong with her voice. It didn't quite sync up with her mouth movements, like I was watching a badly dubbed movie. "I really need to go," I said, backing away further. "Have a good night." I turned and started walking back toward the elevator, moving faster than I probably should have. Behind me, I could hear the door to 714 closing slowly, the hinges creaking in the silence. I pressed the elevator call button and waited. The indicator above the door showed the elevator was on the 4th floor. It started to climb. 5, 6. I heard a sound behind me. Footsteps, slow and measured, coming from the direction of office 714. I glanced back. The woman was standing in the hallway, maybe 20 feet away, just standing there and staring at me. "Did you forget something?" I called out, trying to sound calm. She didn't answer. Just started walking toward me. Those same slow, measured steps. The elevator indicator showed it was still on 6. Come on, I thought. Move. The woman was getting closer. 15 feet, 10 feet. Her expression hadn't changed, still that empty stare, but something about her posture was wrong now. Too stiff, too mechanical. The elevator finally arrived, and the doors opened. I practically threw myself inside and jabbed the lobby button. The doors started to close, but slowly, so painfully slowly. The woman was right outside now, just a few feet from the elevator. She reached out toward me, and I saw her hand. The skin looked wrong, too smooth, too perfect, like plastic or wax. The doors closed. The elevator started to descend. I slumped against the wall, my heart pounding. What the hell was that? Who was that? What was wrong with her? The elevator passed the 6th floor, the 5th, the 4th. Between the 4th and 3rd floors, it shuddered and stopped. The lights flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. No, 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 I muttered, pulling out my phone to use as a light. Come on, don't do this. I could hear something above me, a scraping sound like metal on metal, coming from the top of the elevator car. I looked up. In the dim light from my phone, I could see the access panel in the ceiling of the elevator, and as I watched, it started to move. Someone was opening it from above. I pounded on the elevator doors. Help! Somebody help me! The access panel slid aside. A face appeared in the opening, silhouetted against the darker shaft above. I couldn't see details, but I knew who it was. Why did you leave? The woman's voice asked from above, still flat and emotionless. I said I wanted company. The elevator suddenly lurched back into motion, dropping fast, too fast. I stumbled and fell to my knees as the car plummeted downward. The face in the access panel disappeared. The elevator slammed to a stop at the lobby level, the impact hard enough to knock me flat on the floor. The doors opened. I scrambled out into the lobby and ran for the exit. Behind me, I could hear the elevator starting to move again, heading back up. I burst out of the building and into the street. It was raining, a cold October rain that soaked through my jacket in seconds. I ran to my car, got in, and locked the doors. I sat there, breathing hard, trying to make sense of what had just happened. After a few minutes, I looked up at the building. Most of the windows were dark, but on the 7th floor, I could see a light in one window. And silhouetted against that light was a figure, standing motionless, looking down at the street. Looking at me. I started my car and drove away. I called the restaurant and told them I was done for the night, that I wasn't feeling well. I didn't tell them what had really happened. How could I? They wouldn't have believed me. The next day, I checked the delivery records. There was no order for Alex Porter, no order to that building at all. According to the system, I hadn't made any deliveries the previous night. I did some research on the building. It was mostly vacant, had been for years. A few small businesses rented space on the lower floors, but the upper floors were empty, and according to the building directory, there was no office 714. The 7th floor only went up to office 79. I quit the delivery job 2 weeks later. I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't drive around at night making deliveries without thinking about that building, that woman, that empty stare. I still see that building sometimes when I'm in that part of the city. It's still there, still mostly vacant. And sometimes, late at night, I'll see a light on the 7th floor. Just one window, glowing in the darkness. And I wonder if she's still there, still waiting, still looking for company. I delivered groceries for an online service in rural Iowa for a year and a half. It was one of those apps where people order their groceries online, and drivers go to the store, shop for everything, and then deliver it to the customer's house. It paid pretty well, especially when you got those big orders with decent tips. Most of my customers were elderly folks who couldn't drive anymore, or busy families who didn't have time to shop. I got to know a lot of them pretty well, delivering to the same houses week after week. But there was one customer I only delivered to once. A woman named Margaret Harrison, who lived way out in the middle of nowhere, down a long dirt road surrounded by cornfields. The order came through on a Saturday afternoon in late August. It was a big one, over $200 worth of groceries, and the tip was $40, so I accepted it immediately. The shopping part was normal. I went through the list, grabbed everything, checked out, and loaded it all into my car. The delivery address was about 30 miles outside of town, which wasn't unusual for rural Iowa. I plugged it into my GPS and started driving. The route took me out of town and onto progressively smaller roads. First a highway, then a county road, then a gravel road that cut through endless cornfields. The corn was tall this time of year, over 6 feet high, creating walls of green on either side of the road that blocked out everything else. After about 10 miles on the gravel road, my GPS told me to turn onto an even smaller road, really just 2 tire tracks through the corn. I slowed down and carefully navigated onto it, hoping I wouldn't get stuck. The track went on for maybe a mile, winding through the cornfield, before it opened up into a clearing, and there was the farmhouse. It was old, really old. One of those white clapboard houses from the 1800s, 2 stories with a wraparound porch and a steep roof. It looked like it had been nice once, but now it was falling apart. The paint was peeling, some of the windows were broken, and the porch sagged dangerously. There was a pickup truck parked near the house, old and rusted, but probably still functional. Chickens wandered around the yard. A dog was lying on the porch, some kind of mixed breed that didn't even lift its head when I pulled up. I parked and started unloading the groceries. There were 6 bags total, all pretty heavy. I carried them up to the porch and, stepping carefully on the rotted boards, knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again and called out, "Grocery delivery for Margaret Harrison." Still nothing. I tried the doorbell, but it didn't seem to work. I was starting to get frustrated. This happened sometimes with older customers. They'd place an order and then forget about it, or fall asleep, or turn off their hearing aids. I pulled out my phone to call the customer, but I had no signal. Not even one bar. Not surprising, given how far out I was. I decided to try the door. It was unlocked and swung open easily, revealing a dark interior. "Hello? Mrs. Harrison, I have your groceries." No response, but I could smell something cooking. Something that smelled like meat and vegetables, like someone was making stew or soup. "Mrs. Harrison?" I picked up the grocery bags and stepped inside. The inside of the house was dim, the windows covered with heavy curtains that blocked out most of the light. As my eyes adjusted, I could see I was in a living room, old furniture, doilies on the tables, a fireplace with a mantel covered in photos. Everything looked like it was from another era. I walked through the living room toward what I assumed was the kitchen, following the smell of cooking. "Mrs. Harrison, I'm just going to put your groceries in the kitchen, okay?" The kitchen was in the back of the house, a large room with old appliances and a big wooden table. There was a pot on the stove, steam rising from it, but no one was there. I set the grocery bags on the table and looked around. This was getting weird. Someone was obviously here. The food was cooking. The door had been unlocked. But where were they? "Hello? Is anyone home?" I heard a sound from upstairs, a thump like something heavy falling. Then silence. "Mrs. Harrison, are you okay?" I should have left. I know that now, but I was worried that maybe she'd fallen or was having a medical emergency or needed help, so I went to the stairs and started climbing. The staircase creaked with every step. At the top was a narrow hallway with several closed doors. The hallway was dark, lit only by the faint light coming from downstairs. "Mrs. Harrison," I called out, "do you need help?" One of the doors at the end of the hall was slightly open. I walked toward it, my footsteps echoing on the old wooden floor. As I got closer, I could see into the room. It looked like a bedroom. There was an old-fashioned bed with a metal frame, a dresser, a rocking chair by the window, and in the rocking chair, facing away from me, was an old woman. "Mrs. Harrison?" I stepped into the room. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I've got your groceries. I left them downstairs in the kitchen." The woman didn't move, didn't turn around, just sat there in the rocking chair, perfectly still. I walked around to the front of the chair so I could see her face, and that's when I realized something was very, very wrong. The woman in the chair was dead. Not recently dead, long dead. Her skin was gray and sunken, her eyes milky and unfocused. Her mouth hung open in a silent scream. She was wearing an old-fashioned dress, and her hands were folded in her lap, arranged carefully like she'd been positioned that way on purpose. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. I needed to get out of this house. Now. I turned to run and nearly collided with someone standing in the doorway. A man, maybe in his 40s, wearing dirty overalls and a blank expression. He was huge, well over 6 feet tall and broad-shouldered. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice deep and slow. I'm just delivering groceries," I stammered, "for Margaret Harrison. I'll just go. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. You saw her." It wasn't a question. I should call someone, the police or... "She's been dead for 3 months, the man said matter-of-factly. "I haven't buried her yet. Don't know how." I backed up until I hit the wall. "I need to leave, right now." The man didn't move from the doorway. "You brought the groceries?" "Yes. They're downstairs. You can keep them, no charge. I'm just going to go now." He studied me for a long moment with those blank, dull eyes. Then he stepped aside. "Okay." I didn't wait around to see if he'd change his mind. I ran past him, down the stairs, through the living room, and out the front door. I practically threw myself into my car and started the engine with shaking hands. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. The man was standing on the porch, watching me leave, and in one of the upstairs windows, I could see the silhouette of the rocking chair with the dead woman still sitting in it. I called 911 as soon as I got back to an area with cell service. I told them everything: the address, the dead woman, the man in the house. They said they'd send someone to investigate. I found out later what happened. The woman was indeed Margaret Harrison, and she'd been dead for months, just like the man had said. The man was her son, Thomas Harrison. He had some kind of developmental disability and had been living alone with his mother in that farmhouse his entire life. When she died, he didn't understand what to do, so he just kept her there, kept taking care of the house, cooking meals, living his life like she was still alive. He'd placed the grocery order using her account, which was still active. He probably didn't even realize she was dead, not really. He just knew she wasn't talking to him anymore. They took him to a care facility. The house was condemned. Margaret Harrison's body was finally buried. But I can't stop thinking about those 3 months. Thomas Harrison living in that house with his dead mother, cooking dinner every night, going about his routine like everything was normal. And I wonder how much longer it would have gone on if I hadn't delivered those groceries. If I hadn't gone inside, if I hadn't found her. I quit the grocery delivery job a month later. I couldn't do it anymore. Every farmhouse I drove past, every isolated home at the end of a long dirt road. I kept imagining what might be inside, what other horrors might be hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to stumble upon them. This story takes place in my hometown of Columbus, Ohio. I'd been delivering for a national sub-sandwich chain for about 8 months when this happened. It was my last delivery run before I moved out of state for a new job, and I'd been feeling nostalgic all day, driving through neighborhoods I'd known my whole life. It was a Thursday night in May, around 9:30 p.m. The order came through for 2-foot-long subs and a bag of chips, delivery to an address in a neighborhood called Clintonville. I knew Clintonville well. It's an older part of Columbus, lots of families and college students, tree-lined streets and houses from the early 1900s. Safe neighborhood. Normal neighborhood. The address was 447 West Como Avenue. I'd never delivered there before, but Como Avenue was a street I'd driven down dozens of times. I knew exactly where it was. I picked up the order and started driving. It was a nice night, warm and clear, with that particular quality of light you get in late spring right before sunset. I drove through familiar streets, past familiar landmarks, feeling that bittersweet mix of nostalgia and excitement about my upcoming move. I turned onto Como Avenue and started looking for house numbers. 443, 445, and then the next house was 449. There was no 447, just a gap between two houses, a narrow vacant lot overgrown with weeds and small trees. I pulled over and checked the address on my phone. Definitely 447 West Como Avenue. I looked at the gap between the houses. There was no structure there, no indication there had ever been a house there. Just an empty lot. I tried calling the customer. The phone rang twice, and then someone picked up, but they didn't say anything. I could just hear breathing on the other end. "Hello, this is your sub-delivery. I'm at the address you gave, but I don't see a house here. Can you give me better directions?" The breathing continued for a few more seconds, and then a voice said, "I can see you." I looked around. The houses on either side of the empty lot had lights on, and I could see into the windows. Normal living rooms, normal people going about their normal evenings. No one was looking out at me. "Okay, where are you? I have your food." "Turn around," the voice said. I looked in my rearview mirror. The street behind me was empty. No cars, no people. "I don't see anyone," I said, starting to get annoyed now. "Can you just come out and get your order?" "I'm right behind you," the voice said. I spun around in my seat and looked out the back window of my car. No one was there. The street was empty. A chill ran down my spine. "Listen, if you don't come out and get your food in the next 2 minutes, I'm leaving." "You can't leave," the voice said. "You're at the wrong address." "What? You gave me this address?" 447 West Como Avenue. "Yes, but this isn't 447 West Como Avenue." I looked at the house numbers again. 45 on my left, 49 on my right, empty lot in between where 447 should be. "I'm exactly where you told me to be." "No," the voice said, and there was something wrong with it now, something distorted and wrong. "You're somewhere else." "Look again." I looked at the house numbers, and they were different. The house on my left now said 3421. The house on my right said 343. I was on a different street entirely. But I hadn't moved. I'd been sitting in the same spot the whole time. "What the hell?" I muttered, my heart starting to race. "You're getting closer," the voice said, and it sounded pleased now. "Just a little further." "Closer to what? What are you talking about?" "To where you need to be." I started my car. I needed to get out of here, to go somewhere well lit and public and normal, but when I tried to shift into drive, the gear stick wouldn't move. It was like it was locked in place. The voice on the phone said, "You can't leave until you make the delivery." I looked around frantically. The street I was on didn't look quite right anymore. The trees were different, bigger and more overgrown. The houses looked older, more run down, and the sky was darker than it should have been, like hours had passed in just a few seconds. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Exactly where you've always been," the voice said. "You just couldn't see it before." I heard a tapping on my window. I turned and screamed. There was a face pressed against the glass. A face that was wrong in every possible way. Too long, too pale, with eyes that were completely black and a mouth that was stretched into an impossible smile. I scrambled away from the window, pressing myself against the passenger door. The face didn't move, just kept staring at me with those empty black eyes and that terrible smile. The voice on the phone said, "Leave the food outside, then you can go." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Okay, I'll leave it. Just let me go." The face outside the window slowly pulled back and disappeared from view. I grabbed the bag of subs with one hand and, keeping my eyes on the window, pushed open my door and dropped the bag onto the ground. Then I slammed the door shut and locked it. The gear stick moved freely now. I threw the car into drive and hit the gas, not caring where I went as long as it was away from there. I drove for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The streets gradually became familiar again. The houses looked normal. The sky lightened to its proper evening color. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour gas station, everything looked like Columbus again. Like the world I knew. I sat in my car under the bright lights of the gas station, breathing hard, trying to convince myself that what I'd just experienced had been real. I checked my phone. The call log showed I'd been on the phone for over an hour, but it had only felt like a few minutes, and the number I'd called was disconnected when I tried it again. I checked the delivery app. The order for 447 West Como Avenue had disappeared. According to the app, I hadn't made any deliveries that night at all, but the subs were gone. I'd left them on that street, whatever street it really was, and something had taken them. I drove home and packed up the last of my belongings. I left Columbus 2 days later and never went back. My family asks me sometimes why I don't visit, why I'm so eager to avoid my hometown. I tell them it's because I'm busy, because of work, because of 1,000 different excuses. But the real reason is because I'm afraid. Afraid that if I go back, I might end up on that street again. That wrong version of Como Avenue where the houses have different numbers and the sky's too dark and things with impossible faces wait outside your car window. I'm afraid I might end up at 447 West Como Avenue, the address that doesn't exist, the place I should never have been.